when you create conditions for people to tap into their own stories and be able to own the layers of those stories and their lived experiences that may include wounds, you create wounded healers, people who have an understanding of the wounds that they've been experienced, but the wounds don't have a last word.
That idea that you don't have to say anything, that you can hold that resonant space, and how extraordinary healing that can be, that someone feels heard from it, is really quite a thing. And that maybe that's where yearning comes in, that yearning to just be able to say what's truly there.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by John Templeton Foundation and Templeton Religion Trust. Hey everyone, this is the second half of my conversation with Deepa Patel and Dr. Angel Acosta on our yearning to bring about healing in the world. In the second half, we're going to talk about what it means to be a wounded healer. Our guests are going to reflect on the resilience needed by frontline workers, the challenges posed by professionalism in human connection, and the importance of agency in fostering healing, particularly for vulnerable communities like refugees. And finally, we're going to conclude with a guided meditation to center you and inspire you on your own journey to be an agent of healing. Let's get started. I was reflecting on the work of a Christian spiritual writer, Henry Nouwen, who has a book called The Wounded Healer, and he writes there that nobody escapes being wounded. We're all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question is not how can we hide our wounds so that we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others, right? And I wonder whether in the work you've done, perhaps Angel, in the work you've done with teachers, with leaders, with marginalized communities, are there ways in which you've learned something about your own woundedness or experienced a healing of your own woundedness or found yourself putting your own woundedness in service of healing? I don't know if that resonates and evokes any memories for you.
Yeah, it resonates profoundly because, the Greek, I think he may have been a demigod, Chiron, just the wounded healer archetype, where it comes from. Jung reinterprets Chiron's story of leveraging that wound that he had in the service of humanity. And Jung ends up having larger conversations around the wounded healer archetype and doctors and the doctor's role of attending to his or her or their own wound to be able to support the patient. But that was a data point in my research, was this concept of wounded healing. So it was a playful concept that we played with a lot, significant, so much so that we created a wounded healer project in the context of educators. So we worked with educators who had committed to staying in the classroom during the pandemic. For those of you who might not know this, there was a crisis on top of the pandemic where teachers were leaving the classroom because of it revealed so much of the tensions in education. So we did this whole Wounded Healer portrait series. We took these beautiful, elegant portraits of these educators who were staying in the classroom and were leveraging and using healing-centered pedagogy. And what we found was a classic insight that I'm sure Deepa can relate to this, is the power of story and how much healing story is, storytelling. The storytelling, both via the orator and the listener and the audience. So for me, what I've found is when you create conditions for people to tap into their own stories and be able to own the layers of those stories and their lived experiences that may include wounds, you create wounded healers, people who have an understanding of the wounds that they've been experienced, but the wounds don't have a last word. In fact, one of the questions that you had primed us for this is this idea of yearning for healing. And honestly, I don't yearn for healing. I think that if I were to yearn for healing, I would yearn for a sense of arrival that I know will never come. Right. So I yearn for wounded healing. I yearn for wounded healing. I yearn for the courage to be able to taste my own suffering and doing it so much so in an open way that would allow me to be in this cycle of wounded healing while wounded.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, Angel, also about something else. In my experience of working, there's of course my own woundedness. I wonder if you'd say more about that capacity to sit, to just be present to another's wounding without having to fix it or do something with it, because that's the place that I got closest to my own woundedness in the work that I've been doing, and it carries on, is to be aware that however much I hadn't realized how there was this thin layer over my heart that whenever I saw the wounding of others, it was like a protective little barrier that not even always conscious, and I would pride myself of like I'm not a fixer or whatever, but it was still there, which would just protected me just enough so that I wouldn't have to fully experience the wound of another. Do you know what I mean? And it's the biggest lesson has been of what it means to actually let myself feel the suffering of another with nothing else there, and to the point of going, there might not be anything that can be done here. Do you know what? And I just wonder whether in what you found in your research about that idea that how we approach healing is always, oh yes, we'll find a way for this to happen. But
Yeah, so much there, and formal scholarship around vicarious trauma, and we did a lot of work around the vicarious trauma that teachers experience, holding space for students, and because there was so much burnout. There's some discourse around that now around teacher wellness you might find, but I didn't have to go too deep into the research to get insights around what you're saying. Even recently with the passing of my father, and the way that transpired and the way that I was able to hold the grief, over the last several months. Like, I've had people who've lost people and have shared, and there's something about the ways in which I held my grief that allowed me to be there and hold space for folks in such a profound way that even in my silence of just hold it. Cause sometimes someone shares something with you, you want to immediately just kind of support, but no, since I was able to hold my own grief and hold my own wounds around that, there's a container, I think, that you can create for folks. In formal scholarship, they'll call it a generative social field. There's a field you can create between you and another, between you and a community when you're facilitating. And the way in which you hold yourself activates that field in a way that we might learn more about that in the future when we have more metrics for studying group dynamics.
actually, you've just reminded me, one of the pieces of work that I did was with teachers in Delhi, because COVID was so horrific in Delhi, and we got invited to some other work that I was doing to actually kind of be with teachers as to how they respond to the level of death that was going on for their students. And one of the pillars of this work was listening in silence. And you could see the skepticism on everyone's face as you're kind of sitting there going, wait, we're going to ask you to see if it's possible for you to not say anything, to not look to do anything, but to just be silent, to be a silent witness for the person that's speaking to you. And it was, and they'd go away and come back and go, oh my God, that was unbelievable. Like, I didn't say anything, and this person was so grateful that I was listening. And, in India in particular, you get given so much advice. It's like the moment you name a problem, you've got 10 solutions. But that idea that you don't have to say anything, that you can hold that resonant space, and how extraordinary healing that can be, that someone feels heard from it is really quite a thing. And that maybe that's where yearning comes in. That yearning to just be able to say what's truly there.
Yeah. A few years ago was working with a foundation in Texas, and we were trying to equip teachers to be sort of better frontline mental health, caregivers, right? Because a lot of students in classrooms who are, struggling with serious mental health challenges. And our assumption at the beginning was that teachers don't really know how to recognize what's going on and make referrals and so forth. And it turned out from our research that we were wrong. They were actually pretty good at figuring out what was going on. At least our, surveys indicated that their mental health literacy was pretty good and they had the right set of responses. The challenge was they themselves were burnt out, that they didn't have the ability to hold space for others because they didn't have any place to go to with their own challenges. And so then it gets to the point where I know what I'm supposed to do to help this other person, but I can't get there. I can't allow myself to go there because I'm just so frustrated and can't deal with what's going on inside me. And I'm sure this kind of thing happens with a lot of other folks on the front lines, activists, people who are doing development work and so forth, humanitarian work, etc. Are there concrete practices that you all have seen that you've used that could help folks who are in this situation? Like, how do you how do you train them, or how do you help them to better engage in these contexts and to find help for this kind of challenge?
Yeah. There's a lot of work around contemplative-based resilience. One of our strategic partners, the Garrison Institute, has a whole program. So check out Garrison Institute, contemplative-based resilience. Very powerful work around helping folks who are in the front lines of change, of transformation in refugee camps or post-earthquake, post-disaster. They've developed all kinds of applications and mindfulness-based apps to support folks in the front lines. From dipping my toe into some of that work, part of it is kind of connecting to what Deepa said around the communities that she had access to who were going to church, often. You got to understand that, church or a spiritual community is a kind of psychosocial coding. It's a kind of a music too. It's kind of a psychosocial somatic sonic coding that once you exit that space, the brutality and the realness of the world has a less of a weathering effect on the person, on the community. So when it comes to frontline workers and contemplative-based resilience, you just want to create the spaces and the containers or the time, right? That's what the theory of change when it comes to the app is, that you would create these mini videos that somebody who's in the front line can just stop, pull away from the work and just kind of hold themselves in these practices, in this knowledge, in these videos. So that's kind of like what I would immediately say is that when it comes to frontline workers is giving them the resources and the support to pull them away from the front lines, to turn to their inner landscape, whatever way they can, whether it be through contemplative practice or some kind of spiritual practice.
I'll say it again, and this is more from experience than necessarily, giving you a body of work. The thing that I see more and more is that experience of making something together, where your label of you're the teacher or you're the aid worker or you're the refugee, because often what we do whenever we're together is go, hi, my name is da 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 and this is what I do. But if you drop that and you're all making something together, which you might not know how to do it, like just doing embroidery, or making something, that creates a kind of equalizing factor of stillness and concentration, which is really different, because when we're learning or we're trying something new, it does the same thing, right? You're out of the thing that you're in and you're somewhere else. And there's just a sense of what's possible then in that quietude. And I really am just more and more surprised by what happens. It doesn't matter who walks in the room. If they can take part in an activity, it changes the nature of it.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Yeah, I think these lessons are really crucial. I mean, we've been talking about healing, and of course, for a lot of people, the first thing that comes to mind is medicine, right? And the medical profession is one of the places where you see the highest levels of burnout among physicians, nurses, and so on. And so that's really a space that's in desperate need of reform, of finding ways to better support healers and to have a more sustainable model, more generative model of healing. And perhaps there might be something that could carry over from the practices that you all are suggesting to that world. I don't know how that could happen given all of the pressures that hospital systems are in and physicians are in, but I wonder if there might be anything you've seen there or anything you might recommend that could work even in a context like that.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly that when it comes to burnout, some of the scholarship around it, when burnout became to be a thing in the 1970s as a concept, with three things. There are many more, but one, a sense of emotional exhaustion. Like you're so exhausted you can't even feel your feelings. Two, a lack of appreciation, from those who you report to or those who you work for. And then three, a reduced satisfaction in the work you're doing. And part of what happens is what's called a burnout cascade. So you're feeling emotionally exhausted, maybe for years. You're being disrespected or just not acknowledged at work, and then you just kind of lose your mojo when it comes to work. And then there's a cascade, meaning there's that one event, that one argument, that one instance, and you're literally, your system just gets flooded and you fully burn out. So one of the little things that I think, in this case hospitals, or in this case anybody in the health professions, can begin to do is, one, constantly creating opportunities to discuss your why around the work. Because your why around the work allows you to stay connected to the satisfaction around why you're doing it. And then two, developing inside the hospital peer-to-peer connections that are supportive to express and articulate the emotional and difficult work of working in the hospital, because that helps with the emotional fatigue. And then lastly, supervisors can do a better job at just acknowledging micro moments with residents, like just kind of really just like, I saw you, the way you took care of that patient, I really appreciate it. Like just like little affirmative moves help with reducing this sense of not being appreciated from. So it's already tactical things that people can do, and then that administrators can do. And it works the same way in schools, people, and principals just acknowledging teachers more, helping teachers think more about the why of why they're doing things more often, all helps to reduce burnout.
I have more of a question. Angel's got wonderful examples. One of the questions that I'm holding in all of the work that I do, and my own experience of being in hospital, all of those things, the question that I have is around effect and impact of professionalizing things, in terms of how that then impacts on our capacity to relate to each other. Because that professionalizing of being a customer, a client, that seems to always take away from that very simple act, right? And I'm just, more and more curious about it. And I understand that it can be used as a particularly if you're working on the front lines of anything, that you need something that allows you to protect. So that's there. But that question of professionalism and relation is sort of there in my mind as I watch it, maybe as an inquiry.
Yeah, it's a very tricky one, right? Because there's the need for boundaries, there's the prevention of abuse and so forth, as well as, especially in the US, the constant fear of lawsuits. And there's so many things that conspire to generate.
So we just have more and more of those, and within it, because I certainly see that in the refugee camp, where a refugee is a beneficiary, or they're just, their identity is caught up, so that it is like they lose their humanness and their humanity. There's a wonderful young man that we work with. He says he has this wonderful jacket which says, "A refugee is a situation, not an identity." I think that's where my curiosity about this question has come from, that often we're in situations, they're not our identities, and what's that possibility. So
Great. Listen, I have so many more questions for you, but I know we're running up against time. But I wonder if y'all could perhaps maybe say a word about what it is that you're really excited about, or what's really sort of in front of you these days in this coming year, or the next little phase of the work you're doing that you're either most hopeful about, or that where you find yourself called or perhaps longing to maybe bring about healing or to serve. Like, what does that look like for you these days? I know, Angel, you're doing a lot of work on AI these days. I don't know if that's something you might want to speak to, but anything else too?
Yeah. AI work is interesting, and it's too complicated, especially the ethics around it. So I kind of like dip in and out of it because I'm tired. It's a lot, especially with the ways in which it consumes so much water.
Yeah.
So much water is needed in one of my favorite states, California. So I struggle there. But I think we're in an interesting time, in terms of the different challenges that are being thrown at us. And I'm actually excited to figure out a way to make, beautiful work, right? In light of your podcast, right? What is, beautiful work, beauty at work. And so I just broadly commit to taking the heat of the challenges that are within my community and try to kind of mold programming that is beautiful. So for example, the poly opportunity with the House of Beautiful Business, what does it mean to look at the most pressing challenges and look at them as gentle opportunities for intervention, and not even intervention in terms of changing the actual world, but to be in this relationship, as Deepa kind of alludes to. I think the Sustainable Development Goals, development goals, all these ways to professionalize and create metrics, to intervene, just have maybe fallen short in some regards. So what does it mean to be in this dynamic relationship with poly opportunities? I think that is where a lot of my energy is in right now.
Great.
Oh, it's such a nice, juicy question. And I kind of want to piggyback off in terms of what you've just said about opportunity, poly opportunity. And I really feel that within the refugee context, but just others as well, where it's, the US is one of the biggest resettlers of refugees. And of course, with the new administration that's coming in, literally, it wipes out any opportunity for resettlement for refugees around the world for many different reasons. But in a way, what it did for me was it started to bring up that question of what happens when you move from being a beneficiary to having agency, and how and agency is so much about a mindset in particular. So I'm excited about thinking through what agency looks like in any given situation within this, which I think is relational work rather than metrics work. It has creativity in it. But if I, just for a moment, there was this mind shift of like, oh, what if I just turned this around and went, right now, everything's open. Like, you might be in a refugee camp, but hey, you're amongst the bravest, you're amongst the most courageous. You know how to do all kinds of stuff that most of us don't know how to do. You know how to play the system, right? I'm so interested in the fact that many people know how to play the system, and how do we work off the back of that play and the back of that agency. So it still speaks to the beautiful work that you're talking about, Angel, but I'm really fascinated by that. And I think the other in agency is the whole notion of my own playfulness is around what it would mean to be a secret agent in this time. I feel like a whole redefinition of secret agents is up in what they're doing. So that's a playful thing, which isn't metric based,
right.
but has something of the relational. And you're both smiling, and that's where I know that secretly we all want to be secret agents.
Right. That's amazing. Well, I wonder, Angel, if you might perhaps maybe close us with some kind of a centering practice or meditation that could help us to move forward from this episode as secret agents of healing in the world?
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. And to be in that playful spirit, I'm a double agent.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Not secret.
Double. Got it.
Yeah. But just inviting everybody here and listening to just, as we began that wonderful contemplative practice with Deepa, just if you feel comfortable, you can gently just close your eyes and take a gentle, deep breath in through your nose and gently out through your mouth. And just gently find your own gentle rhythm with your breath. Feeling into the breath as it comes in as a way to take in the world. And as you exhale, a way to letting it go. So this rhythm of taking it in, both the breath and the world. As you exhale, letting it go. The breath as a way to metabolize life. We'll take a few more gentle, deep breaths before we close. Taking one last full breath in through the nose. And as you exhale, just gently opening your eyes back up, coming back to your space, coming back to this moment. Thank you for joining us. My pleasure.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you, Angel. Thanks, Deepa. That'll be a treat for those of us listening on 2X. This is such a joy. Can we direct our viewers and listeners to any of the work you're doing? Anything you want to point them to? Perhaps, Deepa, where can we direct them to your work?
The work that I'm doing is called Vital Signs, and there's a website that you can go to that you can learn more about the refugee work.
Great.
And the Sufi work is directed towards the Inayatiya, which is one of the lineages of Sufism.
Great. Yeah, we'll put those links in our show notes. And Angel, how about you?
Yeah, just check out the Acosta Institute.com.
Great. Excellent. Great.
It's really wonderful to see how well it's going across Angel. It's just like flourishing. It's magic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for the beautiful work you're doing, and it's such a pleasure to start the year off with you all, and wish you the very best in everything that lies ahead.
And thank you for the work you're doing. This is a really nice thing.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone who would find it of interest. Also, please subscribe and leave us a review if you haven't already. Thanks, and see you next time.